Hello, everybody. How are you? Good? Wonderful. Thank you. I know it's the post-lunch slump, but we're so happy to have you here. And our past panel, Kelly, Jamie, and Carrie, thank you so much for sharing your expertise on transitioning from pediatric to adult care. I was young once. It's not easy to go from being a teenager to an adult just in general. Now with Instagram, I don't know how kids are doing it. And then add rare diseases and the complication of care and transitioning. It was a really great session, and I'm so glad to have heard it. I'm Debbie Drell, Director of Membership of the National Organization for Rare Disorders. Pause for applause. And no, stop. And my sister has a rare disease. She's been living with it for 24 years. And everybody who works at the National Organization for Rare Disease either has a connection or is fighting like they do. So we're all family. So thankful that you are all here today. And there are dozens, 64 households that are tuning in live right now. So if you're watching virtually, you're rocking with us in Cleveland, and so happy that you're here. I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Kara Ayers, Associate Professor and Associate Director at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. Kara, with her faithful sidekick, Rocky, who I saw your tweet with the picture of him with the bag, so cute. Kara will discuss ableism as experienced by disabled parents with rare diseases from an individual, community, and systemic perspective from both her professional and personal experience. So without further ado, I will give you you have a clicker?
I do. Yep.
You're good? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here, and please take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much. I am excited to be with you and happy to talk on this topic. I got my phone here because I could talk on it all day and night, so I'm going to keep us on track, though. So let's start with the topic of parenting in my world definitely merges personally and professionally, as Debbie mentioned. I'm both a researcher that studies parenting with a disability, and I'm also myself a parent with a disability, as is my husband. So this is our most recent family picture, and as kids do, they already look older than this now. This was this fall. So I have osteogenesis imperfecta, or OI, which I've always known of as a rare disease in growing up, and was thankful to be connected to my OI community and culture, and that really cultivated so many things for me. So being at an event like this always reminds me of those good times, and I'm so happy to see that carrying forth and other people making those connections. My husband also has OI. We met a couple different places as we were growing up, but the first place was an OI conference, so you never know who you're going to meet this weekend, you know? And we started our family actually with our daughter, Hannah, in 2010. She just turned 12 now. And then we adopted my son Eli at the age of 7 in 2014. So Hannah has the interesting experience of she was at one time an only, then she was the youngest, and now she is the middle because we had our third child, and our hearts are full with this one, Riley, who is 5, and so she was our third child. So this is our family, and Rocky, who came into our family just a few months before everything shut down with COVID. So while we've been together for more than a couple years now, this is actually his first time on a stage, and you can see he's very nervous. So we'll see. He's not, for those that are streaming. If you can't, he's asleep, I think. So on the topic of parents with disabilities, 1 in 10 parents actually live with children and have a disability. So in statistics worlds, that's important, right? Because if we think as we age, many of us acquire a disability or become disabled according to different ways we define it. But when we're actually looking at parents who live with children, 1 in 10 have a disability. So if we think about that, we realize that the experience of parenting with a disability is really not as rare as we might think it would be. And it's important to recognize that, these are all kinds of disabilities. So myself, my physical disability is what impacts my parenting the most, what I have to think around, both in terms of ableism, in terms of society's attitudes about my disability, which we're going to talk more about, but also just in problem solving and the way our environments are. And also occasionally when my disability itself pops up and makes me deal with it as well. So there's all kinds of different layers. I think when people are thinking about, will I become a parent or will my child become a parent, sometimes they get stuck only on that disability specific level. And for me, often that is one of the most clear cut ways, not easy, but clear cut pieces to manage. So if I have a health issue arise, I often know the steps of what to do more clearly than if I have an instance of ableism that I need to navigate relationships and how to handle it so that, there's not, retaliation is an extreme word, but I think those of us in the room understand that, there's so many kind of scales that you want to keep balanced. So if you want your child's teacher to understand that you need notes home in an alternative format because you may be blind, or your literacy level may be such that you need to know what's going on in the classroom, but the materials coming home aren't helping you with that. So you got to balance that. You want the teacher and you to have a partnership with your child, just like other parents want. So when we look at this picture, it reminds me that when I think of parents with disabilities, there's so many different kinds. So there are parents who are deaf, parents who are blind, and many of us have, more than one of those categories checked. Also, as I think this event has highlighted, there are invisible disabilities, visible disabilities. So there are invisible parts of my OI, like fatigue and stamina considerations that I have to make that definitely impact my parenting. But most of my OI, when I'm in person, discloses itself. So I have a visible disability, and for that, there are pros and cons. I don't always have to make the difficult decision in person of when I'm going to bring it up because my wheelchair and my physical appearance brings it up for me. But in other cases, I do, especially if it's something that's not known, like why I might need to be extra cautious because the fact that my bones break easy is not necessarily visible or known to people just because I use a wheelchair. So this image is one of a smokestack with smog coming out, and it's black and white to make it more dramatic and dismal because that's what ableism is, unfortunately. And I use this one in thinking and talking about ableism because I think it represents a few things for me. First of all, that smog, up close, as we see in this picture, we'd all agree that, yep, that's smog. That's probably not super healthy to breathe in. You wouldn't want to jog around that area. So we would all concur on that. And that's kind of examples of big A ableism, where people say, you can't come here because you're disabled. You can't do this because you're disabled. Many times it's couched in an argument of safety, I have found. Often it doesn't necessarily make sense, common sense, but if you've run into those kind of brick walls with people, it doesn't matter. But as we get further away from this smokestack, we can't see the smog in the air anymore, but it's still very much impacting us. So that might be little a ableism, or it might venture into the world of microaggressions, if you're familiar with that term, kind of the paper cuts of oppression that we face as a marginalized group. But it can be a little more explicit than that as well. So as a parent, I guess big A examples of ableism that I've experienced even in the last couple weeks, I'll share more recent ones. Last week, someone told me, they said, no offense, but I just don't believe that people with genetic disabilities should have children. And, I think it's difficult to accept that statement without offense when you think about that my children and my family are here from that decision. But I did my best to listen to their beliefs, which I think are always interesting when it's about someone else's experience, but definitely couched in an idea that genetic disability is bad and something that should always be avoided, which is often a dominant belief in our medical systems as well. It's often accepted as an assumption. Well, of course you would want to avoid that, right? Is something that many medical professionals can practice, whether it's spoken or not. Some examples of policies that sometimes can be that very clear-cut ableism, for whatever reason, they seem to pop up a lot at amusement parks, our family has noticed. Disney World has an interesting policy that our Disabled Parenting Project has been working to advocate against for a while, in that they will not allow people in wheelchairs in the park to hold their children on their lap at any point, which, as we've pointed out, is no more dangerous, especially if you are a wheelchair user and you're not just sitting in a wheelchair for the first time ever in your life in the park that day. But Disney's stance is that it is dangerous that the child could fall, and our reply to that has been, how is it any more dangerous than holding your child on your hip? I mean, a parent walking could fall at any point. So our more local amusement park also has these challenging policies related to the carousel, and as my luck would have it, my 5-year-old is obsessed with the carousel. So they have a rule that the parent has to stand and secure the child on the horse around the carousel. Whereas my husband, I'm not tall enough to secure her on the horse, but my husband is. And so he had demonstrated to them, look, I'm securing her on the horse, as the policy states. And, the young person managing the ride reiterated, no, you have to stand to secure them. And again, when you think about stability, you're probably more stable seated in a device that locks than on your wobbly feet. But, ableism doesn't always come with common sense. The other reason that I like this image is it reminds me that I wasn't born with a gas mask to protect me from this smog, and my parents weren't handed a gas mask. They weren't handed a cure for the unending amounts of smog that they had breathed in their entire life. We're all surrounded by these messages. It's what we see in society about disability, and I think even more so, it's what we don't see. Think about the last time that you've seen a parent with a disability in any media portrayal. Think about movies, television shows. They're hard to come by. So the absence of seeing that people with disabilities can be parents in itself sends a powerful message that has taught us something over the years, whether we realize it or not. And so we have to work to unlearn that, to cleanse our body of this smog that we've breathed in. And it doesn't come overnight. It doesn't come upon the life-changing experience of having a child with a disability, and it doesn't come with being born with a disability. Internalized ableism is the term and concept that we study about what it feels like to take those messages in about oneself and be ableist towards our own experiences. So I think I've defined ableism as we've gone with that image, which stands out to me. But in terms, it's the belief that non-disabled people are superior to disabled people. And it can be learned and unlearned. And I'm of the belief that this is an ongoing, lifelong challenge for us to identify these messages that were being sent and decide, do they match with our belief that a disabled life has value and beauty and belongs here, or do they not? And so, again, it's rampant in healthcare, not because healthcare providers aren't amazing. I'm trained as a psychologist. I have so many amazing colleagues, not because people don't want to help and people aren't good, but because this is built into our society. So if we don't identify it, we can't actively dismantle it together. Some ways that ableism is also perpetuated is through the inaccessible places and experiences that we encounter. So when you go into that doctor's office, even if you don't need the exam table that raises and lowers, take note if they have it. What if you needed to be weighed and you used a wheelchair? The vast majority of women with physical disabilities who use wheelchairs are never weighed during their pregnancies, which has enormous effects for being able to monitor outcomes and results in outcomes that aren't expected, not because of the disability. So if that were my experience and we were to get to a cross where we say, gosh, I wish we would have known that you would gain this water weight during your pregnancy, but we couldn't weigh you. So that really isn't related to my disability. It's related to the society that we live in that is inaccessible and is fraught with ableism, unfortunately. Another important point is that ableism can be intentional or unintentional. The primary thing I often hear, first response, is, well, they meant well. People mean well. That policy means well. It intends to do this. But the impact is always more important than the intent. And if you're interested in that statement, as I really, really am, Brene Brown is a thought leader in that area for me. And just reminding you, too, that ableism is present within our disability communities. As a child, I grew up attaching a lot of self-worth and pride to the fact that my disability was, quote, only physical. And I would be very offended. I always looked younger, was smaller, so I would be very offended if people treated me as if either I was younger or as if I had an intellectual disability. And I see this pattern, and I think there's lots of developmental pieces of this that are typical. But I also worry when we fragment ourselves. What does it say when we say, well, I have this type of disability, but definitely not that one? And it's challenging to develop pride in yourself without separating yourself from others in a negative way. But we want to try to break down those hierarchies and not promote them. The exciting thing is there are more options than ever, not only for supporting parenting. These are 3 devices that I just highlighted. This is my Firefly that is always in my trunk. And it has just been a life changer for me. I can get in the grass. I go to my daughter's softball games and no longer have to worry about sidewalks being as great as I wish they were almost 32 years after ADA. But the lap baby is pictured there with a woman in an airplane, which is what it was originally designed for, but it's a great way to secure the baby to your lap seated in a wheelchair. And then the Apple Watch device there is something that some of my deaf mom friends use. It not only alerts you when your baby's crying, but it can pick up on differences if your baby's cry is more likely to be one of hunger, being wet, being tired, being fussy. So it actually goes deeper than just a regular baby monitor. Also, our medical procedures have advanced so that we're able to care for women with disabilities if you pursue parenting through pregnancy in more advanced ways. And in my family, we're very open about all kinds of things, but I've recently talked to my daughter about that she was born via a C-section, and that was related to my size, and that many other moms with OI also have their babies through a C-section. And so she kind of took all this in and didn't say much back. And so I thought, well, I have no idea if she got that or not. But the next day she came to me and she said, I was thinking, and I'm pretty sure that unicorns are born via C-section too. And I thought, I hope so. Yeah, that's a good idea. I don't know, a unicorn pregnancy specialist, but I think that would be a safe bet. So, our community is bigger than ever as well. I'm part of several amazing parenting communities, one being the Disabled Parenting Project. So we have so many resources available if you just want to know more. And if you yourself are either a parent with a disability or a prospective parent, so someone who's thinking about it, we welcome you to a private Facebook group as well, and you just identify as such, and we'd love to have you. So in terms of what we need, this is just me and my son, Eli, and we are proud to see his development as a young person with a disability and just always evolving, thinking about these things and recognizing that I wish I could download overcoming the hard parts of being a teenager with a disability and just put a thumb drive in his head, but it's so hard, and he's working his way through that. But what we need are that people, including our family members, to presume competence in our parenting. We need specialists, as you heard earlier, willing to treat adults with rare diseases. It is so worrisome for me to attend his appointments and know that I have this time clock. I need to get him the care he needs before he goes to the adult system because I know firsthand how limited it is there. We need accommodations to support our children's educational, physical, emotional, and social needs. So when you think about things like accessible playgrounds, those aren't just for our children with disabilities. Those are also for our parents and our grandparents with disabilities so that they can play together with their children. So just seeing the world as a more accessible place in our future is something that we all need for that shared vision. And I wanted to leave you with just a couple of strategies to be anti-ableist, which is a little more assertive of a stance and an important stance to counteract the ableism that exists. So call out when you see negative examples of media portrayals and call in good ones. There are some amazing books out there by disabled authors. 2 that I would recommend real quick would be Move Together. And another is What Happened to You, which I love because it comes from the perspective of what is it like to constantly be asked that question as a kid? And it's different than what you might think. So I encourage, those are just 2 of so many that you can add to your bookshelves. But advocate for your communities to be more accessible with parents with disabilities in mind as well. And think about ways that you can support disability history, culture, and pride, because that'll counteract ableism as well. So I wanted to just end with the takeaway that ableism itself is our largest barrier for parents with rare diseases. And you can be an anti-ableist ally to support our families and make a more inclusive society for all. And last, I wish I could take your questions today, but we have more exciting speakers up next. So I encourage you on my Instagram. Actually, I set up a Ask Me Anything story today. So find me on Instagram, or Twitter is fine, but I didn't know how to set up a question box there. But Kara Ayers, and you can drop your question in there and I'll get back to you today. So thank you all so much and enjoy the rest of the forum.